Well, Germany and the United States yesterday announced plans to send tanks to Ukraine. The United States with Abrams tanks, Germany with Leopard 2 tanks, Poland also announcing it's sending Leopard tanks to Ukraine yesterday. And this morning, we learned that Portugal announced it's sending tanks to Ukraine, a country that I didn't even know had any tanks. Russia says that Europe is now expanding the target for this war, and Russia will see these as potential targets going forward. Have we just escalated things beyond where they were before? Scott Ritter is a former UN weapons inspector. He knows a thing or two about weapons and their implications, and he joins us on the show. Scott, great to have you back.
Thanks for having me.
So last week on the show, you said something that I thought was incredibly important, and I've been thinking about it all week, which is the more weapons we send to Ukraine, the more weapons NATO sends to Ukraine, the weaker it makes Ukraine, both in terms of manpower and, of course, opening it up for further attack. You see this amplification, these additional tanks that are being sent as vindication of your message, or is now Ukraine suddenly going to win this war?
Well, Ukraine's not going to win this war. They're definitely not going to win it with 14 Leopard 2 tanks, A6 variants that Germany claims it's going to provide by the end of March, early April. 14 more Leopard A2 tanks that Poland's going to provide. Between 30 and 50 Abrams tanks, which aren't going to show up on the battlefield till the end of this year or early next year, or any other tanks that are going to be provided. The fact of the matter is, these tanks aren't game changers. The Ukrainians have been trained to fight in Soviet-era tanks, T-72s, and their own T-64 updates, three-person crews. They're inheriting tanks right now, or they're going to receive tanks that have four-person crews. Why? Because you have to manually load these tanks. So automatically, the whole concept of putting a crew in a tank and employing the tank is fundamentally changed. And if you haven't trained on this, if you haven't practiced on it, you're just getting into a system. It's like, if I brought you a Formula One car and you've never trained on high-speed driving, and I said, Clayton, take her for a spin.
Right.
You would be like a little old grandma. And they're, you have no clue what you're doing. You don't know how to handle this piece of machinery. That's going to be the Ukrainians with this equipment. It takes 22 weeks to train an M1 Abrams crew member. I would imagine that the Leopard 2 tank is equally as complex a piece of equipment. And so Germany is going to provide 14 of these tanks in, 10 weeks' time? So even if the Ukrainians were getting training right now, when they receive the tanks, they're not going to be trained on it, let alone know how to what to do with 14 tanks. If anybody thinks 14 tanks is a game changer, you have no clue what modern war is. These 14 tanks will be chewed up if they ever arrive on the battlefield. But the likelihood of all 14 arriving is slim to none because of the maintenance problems of these tanks. This is one of the things we talked about previously about the different infantry fighting vehicles that were being provided and the maintenance nightmare they presented. For the M1 Abrams tank, under ideal circumstances, for every hour of operation, you need 3 hours of maintenance. And that's with American crews that are actually trained, dedicated military occupation specialties of guys who go through the schools, they know how to do this, and they have the entire system backing them up. In the United States system, we'll have a tank company up front, and behind it is this huge system ready to back it up. With the Ukrainians, we're going to put an M1 Abrams tank company out front, and then there's going to be this thin little umbilical cord that goes back because there will be no direct support. If the tank breaks, it has to be removed from the battlefield, taken back to a place where it can be repaired. It's going to be very difficult for this tank to appear on the battlefield because the Russians right now are a little irritated, and they're going to put everything they have into interdicting these weapons before they get to the battlefield. But let's say they get to the battlefield and they break. That just means they have to run the gauntlet one more time to get fixed and then run the gauntlet again to come back. Every time you do that, you're setting up Ukrainians to die. And this is all that's going to happen. These weapons will have no meaningful impact. Just a news flash for NATO and all the NAFO fellas out there that are sort of cheerleading right now that this is a great thing. For the last 20 years, NATO and the United States have been focused singularly on Afghanistan and the Middle East. The last thing they've been doing is preparing for large-scale ground combat in Europe. The Russians have been preparing for large-scale ground combat in Europe since 2008. In 2016, they fundamentally reworked their organizational structures, and they're continuing to update them today for the sole purpose of closing with and destroying a NATO-style army. That doesn't just mean how NATO fights doctrinally, but the equipment. Every piece of Russian equipment that's in the Russian inventory today has been designed and is intended to kill NATO tanks. So if people think that the Leopard 2 showing up on the battlefield is suddenly going to scare the Russians, you're wrong. They're ready for it, they've trained for it, and they have the equipment to deal death and destruction. And for the Germans, I just don't know what's going through their brains.
Yeah.
The idea of putting German tanks on Ukrainian soil for the purpose of killing Russians. Man, that didn't work out too good the last time they did it, and it's not going to work out too good this time.
Yeah.